Hey there, everybody. We are up to C in the A to Z blogging challenge, spooky edition, as we're calling it here at What's Your Ghost Story. And right now, C is for coffee, unlike the B is for bourbon from last night. Really, you guys voted. Your voice was heard. And I thought maybe we'd be talking about the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles, one of the creepiest places anywhere. I was going to say in America, but really anywhere. A place that two different serial killers once set up shop, and that isn't even all that. That's like barely touching the top of the iceberg about what's creepy about the Cecil Hotel. But no, we're going to talk about cemeteries, haunted cemeteries. We've already done a lot of that. So if you want to hear about Resurrection Cemetery, Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, St. James Cemetery down in Justice, Illinois, those are amazing places. All of those are covered in the previous A is for Archer Avenue and B is for Bachelor's Grove episodes. But yeah, it's going to be fun because maybe I can finally talk about some things that aren't just in the book, which by all means, the book is awesome. But I've visited places across America, outside of Chicago as well. And from the thumbnail, let's just start out right here. Let's start in Chicago. This is some more art from the book. This is from Bohemian National Cemetery, which is a really, really beautiful cemetery on the north side of the city. It's perhaps best known as being a place where a lot of the victims of the Eastland disaster are buried. And so when you see the date, and I believe it was 1915, when the boat went down, nearly 900 people on board perished, 22 entire families. Very sad, very sad. And this is one of the monuments within the cemetery that's nicknamed Walking Death. It does not have an ego story behind it. But an interesting thing is that when I was first there with Mary Serwinski doing research, we came across some grounds crew, some grave diggers, and they told us about this monument, which is very well known because it's so gothic looking. But they said the urban legend within the grave digger community is that there's an actual human skull inside of the statue filling the cranium, which is probably not true, but we don't actually know. And it's fascinating that even within the cemetery community, that these kind of urban legends persist and live on, and create a life of their own. I do want to get started by mentioning that I don't have. Oh, I should have put this up before we started, but tonight we'll be doing the letter D, and we had one really great suggestion. I want to give him a shout out if I can find it really quickly. Okay, Brian. Oh, why'd I do this? That is the most Irish Greek name I've ever seen. Brandon, that is Michaelopoulos. Brandon Michaelopoulos suggested for the letter D that we talk about Diana of the Dunes, which is a story out of Indiana. A really great suggestion. And that will be going up against John Dillinger, D for Dillinger. So that is going to be a poll that will go live as soon as I'm done here. And you can vote on what I will talk about tonight. So we are going to do 2 letters today because I got a late start on this idea. One of the most unique cemeteries I think I've ever been in is in Altadena, California, and that is Mountain View Mausoleum. It's huge. I mean, hundreds of thousands of internments here. Both the conventional buried in the ground, and there's this mausoleum that is just enormous. And the more you look around, the more you feel like you are in a Nick Cage National Treasure movie, because there are little bits of symbols hidden everywhere you look. And probably and that's even to the unaided eye. If you actually know how, the significance within the world of the Masons, you'll probably be able to see much, much more. But I have a video. Actually, if you follow on Instagram, you'll see, I think we posted from there not too long ago. And I do have a video that came out a while back. I'll put an in screen on this video, or that'll link directly to it. But I was there with Max, Tim, and we were walking around. I had the privilege to work on a movie that shot here. That location gets used as a movie set quite frequently. But every time we could walk away from set, I would wander and just get lost in the catacombs of this place. It's incredible. If you live in the Los Angeles area, you have to visit it. It's open during normal business hours, and it's kind of just there. It's not really, I don't know. Usually I don't see too much staff on hand, but just wander the place and be enchanted by how unique and I don't know. It's just such a fun place. Um, but when I went back when I wasn't working, you know me, I had an EMF detector with me. I'm like, well, I might as well walk around with this EMF detector in hand and just see. I've never heard any ghost stories about this place, but let's see. And every so often, the needle would spike on it, indicating some sort of electrical interference. And of course, within the ghost hunting community, we think that entities are made up of energy and they may let their presence be known. Um, or we might stumble across them using this EMF detector, kind of like a paranormal metal detector. And this thing would spike on occasion as we're walking around. And we weren't doing an investigation, we were just journeying through this place. And sometimes I'd be able to go back and say, okay, well, it consistently goes off when I walk over this area. There must be some within the floor or within the wall, some wiring that's giving off this kind of electromagnetic field. But sometimes it wouldn't happen. I wouldn't be able to get it to happen again. So what was that? And eventually, I let the people with me wander off, and so I was just alone, just me, the EMF detector, and a camera. So this is all on video. And I was holding it and looking at it, and I said, listen, if anybody's here with me, and if you want to let me know that you're here, just go ahead and touch this item in my hand if you can. Put whatever you can into it, and that to let me know that you're here. And the moment I said that, the needle started to bounce like a heartbeat. It was just instant goosebumps throughout my body. It was pretty incredible. Still don't know who it was. I thank them for letting letting us know that they were here. And Max ended up feeling ill after that. Um, I don't know if that was psychosomatic or if there was something kind of draining the energy from him, but that is something that people can feel sometimes. If they feel some sort of an attachment or a negative presence, they can kind of come down with headaches randomly or feel nauseated even. And Max was the latter in that scenario. Uh, what to talk about? I should talk about Hollywood Forever Cemetery a little bit because this is one of the more grand cemeteries in Los Angeles. It's massive. There are so many people buried here. Um, Even just recently, Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney is interred there recently. But the most famous burial, and I'm going to get into him a lot more when we get towards the end of the alphabet. But Rudolph Valentino is buried there, and he was not supposed to be buried there. He died young and suddenly. An illness came upon him, and he was down. He was operated upon, but never recovered, and so there was kind of a rush to put him somewhere while a big, more proper memorial gets established for him. And they eventually never finished that memorial, and he stayed where he was, which was in his acting teacher's grave, a grave that she had bought for herself to eventually use, but it was just sitting empty for the moment. That was only supposed to be temporary, but that's where he is still to this day. And when he passed away, there were hundreds of thousands of people at this cemetery mourning the end of his funeral procession. And to this day, on my sister's birthday, August 23rd, the day that he died, there is still year after year after year a memorial service held for him. People read poetry, people dance, kind of as a type of celebration of his life, dances from that era. It's quite incredible. I've attended it myself on one occasion. Uh, Very unique thing about this cemetery is that it goes right up against Paramount Studios. And a lot of people buried at the cemetery are people that were in the studio system in one way or another, whether they're actors, grips, electric camera directors, wardrobers, set designers, so on and so forth. And allegedly, the sound stages that butt up right against the cemetery, they frequently have paranormal activity, whether it's props disappearing, objects moving, lights turning off on their own. Allegedly, early in the morning, people will actually even see entities, I guess you would say, walk from their grave sites across the cemetery through the wall and report back to work over at Paramount Studios. I don't know any hauntings about this place, but I always like to mention Pierce Brothers Cemetery in Westwood, California. It's this tiny 1-acre cemetery surrounded by skyscrapers in a very affluent part and a very business oriented part of the city. but that's where Marilyn Monroe is. That's where Hugh Hefner is. That's where the little girl from the Poltergeist movie is buried. Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. I mean, it's the who's who of who's dead. It's unbelievable how many people are buried in this one very small area. And again, a great place to visit if you happen to be in the Los Angeles area. It's so unique. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? You know, I recently, for the letter A, I was talking about Archer Woods Cemetery. I'd mentioned it at least because I didn't really get into it since it's not on Archer Avenue. It is Archer Woods Cemetery, but it's not. It's on Keene, and that is a place that is one of the more spooky places. And I'll talk about a couple really quick Chicago ones, but I'll mention this one because this is a place that I actually had a paranormal experience. It was brief, it was fleeting, as they tend to be. But this is one of the places where the driverless hearse is said to originate from. Now, again, go into the letter A in the video series to really hear that full story. But people claim that it leaves from this cemetery before it makes visits over to Archer Wood, Resurrection Cemetery, St. James Cemetery, and places in between. And when we first went there back in 1999 doing the documentary, we were busted by the cops. We were there at midnight. We saw that this place was not kept up, that the gate was open, that there didn't seem to be anybody paying attention. So we thought, well, we could probably come back and poke around. And we also saw evidence that there's all sorts of nefarious things going on there. We found items hanging by nooses, whether they were Care Bears or Aunt Jemima bottles. Very peculiar that these things were hanging by nooses. These items were hanging by nooses from trees. Other places seem to be a little bit dug up. Very crass. Also, how the cemetery themselves handled burials of the most sensitive of subjects, because you got those big concrete vaults that the coffin goes into. Usually those are hidden somewhere, kind of away from public view. But now, over at Archer Woods Cemetery, they're just sitting out in the open, and some of them with big, thick magic marker have the last name written on the side of somebody who's about to go into there. So again, not the most sensitive way to handle a sensitive moment. So anyway, everything was just unsettling about this place. And one of the legends is that there's a woman that is seen weeping, crying, walking the grounds, crying, very much like the Madonna of Bachelor's Grove. Well, when we were busted by the cops, they were giving us the third degree, as is their job. We were pinned in and questioned, not free to leave. But once they found out what we were doing there, and again, this is back in the 90s where people weren't doing this so much, and maybe it would be less charming nowadays. Like, oh my gosh, you guys came all the way from the north suburbs, the south suburbs to do this documentary on our town. Okay, cool. They started to tell us stories, and they told us more bad stories about the cemetery, about how they don't really keep up with this is, don't quote me if somebody's going to get angry about this, but this is what the Hickory Hills Police Department was telling us, was that they would find bodies that should have been buried long ago that are just kind of wasting away, really negative things like that. But they talked about a partner of theirs, somebody else on the force, who was called for a disturbance call to come to the cemetery. They, like us, they saw people walking around, and of course this guy was scared out of his wits, walking around with his flashlight looking to see if there's any people doing bad things. And a woman appeared next to him and screamed bloody murder while running past him and then vanishing. Allegedly, as the story goes, the guy just fled in the moment and perhaps didn't even show up to work the next day because that was so petrifying. And I can't, first off, that's awesome. We've never heard a story like that from that location. So that's a new story at that time. And to get pretty close to an eyewitness report from a police officer was quite unique. Chicago is really known for their cemeteries, especially Rose Hill and Graceland cemeteries, these huge areas that, the original city cemetery is gone. That was in downtown Chicago, right on the Chicago River. Eventually, the city grew too much. That land was too valuable. They distributed the bodies to these two other grand cemeteries, Rose Hill and Graceland. Rose Hill Cemetery is the one that it's most known for the Francis Pierce Monument, which I think has been fully debunked by now, that things didn't really go down the way the urban legend says. And here's a picture in the book of Francis Pierce with child, as the legend has it, Frances Pierce died during childbirth, and her daughter died shortly thereafter. The grieving husband had this incredible life-size likeness of them created, and you can't tell in that photo so much, but it is encased in glass to keep it safe from the elements. But as the legend goes, on the anniversary of each of their deaths, which are just a couple days apart, the glass will fog up as if full of breath, and sometimes people can even have conversations with the entities that are buried here. Now, I believe this story about all of that going down in that manner has been fully debunked. The real story is out there, and I hope that the story lives on, even though it's not true. The true as a paranormal investigator, it's your job to get to the truth. But as appreciators of folklore, I hope we can still hold on to these nuggets and acknowledge them to maybe not be true, but well, definitely, you want to have the truth all the time. But I don't want to lose these stories, even though we know the real story behind them. So that's there's more. That's where Bobby Franks is buried as well, the victim of the Leopold and Loeb thrill killers, which is a tremendous Chicago story. Clarence Darrow defended them. He knew they were guilty, but he just wanted to spare them of the death penalty, and he did. One of them ended up dying well, they both ended up dying in prison, but one was murdered in prison. And it was said that Bobby Franks' ghost would be seen near his mausoleum, but that stopped when his second killer had passed away. So perhaps he's finally at peace. Over at Graceland Cemetery, now this place, talk about being a museum. This has so many affluent Chicagoans through the ages. Louis Sullivan, the famed architect, Marshall Field, Richard Warren Sears, Montgomery Ward. There are now I'm wondering if it was those actually Sears and Ward. Those are in the mausoleum, the big communal mausoleum at Rose Hill Cemetery, which boasts the largest collection of true Tiffany stained glass anywhere in the world. Both of these places are incredible to visit, and very much you should. So at Graceland Cemetery, it almost feels mythical, some of the legends that go on here. There is Ludwig Wolf, who is a guy that apparently, as the legend has it, was terrified of the prospect of being buried alive. So he had his mausoleum built with, it doesn't even appear in the picture. It's hidden in the bushes, but there's a ventilation system up here. There's the idea is if he was buried alive in this sunken mausoleum, he would still be able to breathe, and there's a staircase up. He'd be able to let himself out. And it's said that Mr. Ludwig Wolf's grave is guarded by black dogs with glowing green eyes. And here is the most photographed piece of funerary art in all of Chicago. That is Eternal Silence, crafted by Laredo Taft. It is the grave of Dexter Graves, and it was said that you could not photograph it. Like whatever energy was around it, it didn't allow cameras to work, which is something that you do come across at paranormal sites, mechanical, electric malfunctions. Now, of course, cut to today, and it's the most photographed piece of funerary art in all of Chicago. Now, that isn't to say that the earlier claims are not true. Who knows? Maybe for a long time there was something around it. It kind of makes me think of the Ghostbusters 2 painting. Just there's some energy within that piece of art that didn't allow cameras to work, and in time that kind of faded. I'm not sure the reality of that, but I hope that's what happened. But the other bit of legend about this grave or this monument is that if you kind of clear your mind and zone out and almost meditatively stare into the eyes of this big cloaked figure, you'll catch a glimpse of your own demise. One of the other more famous graves, as we see right here, still at Graceland Cemetery, is Inez Clark. And as this legend goes, she was killed very young at the age that you see her here, probably fewer than 10 years old. She was killed by a stray lightning bolt during an electric storm. And in real life after her passing, the grounds crew would sometimes find her chair. She's sitting in a chair. She's got a little parasol. They would find her little bench empty, as if someone stole part of the statue, leaving the bench behind, but stealing the girl. and assume that some vandal had taken it, and then later see that she's back. And as legend has it, that's why they put this glass case over it. Most likely, it's to protect her from the elements, but maybe it was to rein her in. And then people would finally put the pieces together and notice that she only went missing on the days of lightning storms. So still, even after death, being terrified of the thing it was that took her from this world. So this is a quick look at a couple haunted cemeteries in LA and Chicago. If you have ever had a paranormal experience, I was going to talk about Archer Woods very quickly. So again, jumping back to Halloween, I think it was in the year 2000 when I was doing that live broadcast on the air with a radio show, and we had a psychic that came along with us. We walked also after dark through Archer Woods Cemetery. I think there was a police officer with us, so this was somewhat above board, at least. I don't know if the owners of the cemetery knew, but at least the police were with us. We were walking through the cemetery live on the air, and a ghost light appeared in front of us, which was really striking. And then again, this is a like just a ball of energy, bright white, like a glowing softball hovering in the air. They can move around, but this just appeared, hung there for a moment, flashed almost, and was gone. And what was amazingly brilliant about that is it's in a cemetery, so its brightness reflected off of all the headstones around us in the pitch black darkness of night. It was really a unique moment. So anyway, thanks for watching. Head over to facebook.com/what's your ghost story to vote on what we'll talk about tonight. John Dillinger or Diana of the Dunes. We're getting up to D in the A through Z challenge. And of course, follow us on all social media. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please comment here on the YouTube video or over on the Facebook page or at whatsyourghoststory.com. One more time, thank you for watching.